Welcome to Reddit Aliens. What strange, eerie thing has happened to you? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy. I had what I thought was a lucid dream, where I basically watched some figure in my dark room look through my bookshelf, pat me on the head, and leave. I woke up to the news from my flatmates that someone had entered our house through the unlocked door during the night. That's the day I decided to invest for a lock on my bedroom. This isn't eerie, it was terrifying. I was 13 to 14-ish and had a couple of my baseball team friends over to spend the night, and we kept hearing this thud. After a few more times, we decided to check it out. We grabbed 3 baseball bats out of my laundry room, looked all over the entire house, checked to make sure it wasn't my dad, and the last room we looked at, I looked out and saw a man trying to climb through the window. He saw us and got the hell out of there. No sleep was had that night. Not happened to me, but to my mom, brother, and dad. In our old house, strange things used to happen. It was never anything serious, but balls would roll around without any starting momentum. The kettle would switch itself on and doors would lock themselves from the inside and outside whenever my brother was in the room. My mom is into her supernatural side, so she asked the neighbors if anything had happened in the house previously. And it turns out the owner before that previous owner was a single mom called Jan, whose only son went off to fight in World War II and died on the beaches of Dunkirk. My mom thought that these occurrences were linked to this woman and her dead son, especially the rooms locking themselves with my brother inside. So she sat down and said something along the lines of, "Jan, I know what happened to your son, and I'm sorry. You can help look after mine, just please stop scaring us and don't hurt any of us." And within 24 hours, all of the creepy shit had stopped, except the front gate would lock when someone left the house and be unlocked when they got back. Jan was just trying to protect you guys. Kind of sweet, kind of sad, but nice. So I walked out into the lounge room one night in the darkness to fetch something, the only light being a soft glow from the kitchen. Now, the way the lounge room was set up, we had one single lounge in clear view from the doorway, and the light switch was a bit of a ways in. So halfway into the room, I noticed on this lounge the faint, wispy outline of a small white dog staring straight at me. It was completely eerily still, just staring forward. The only small white dog we owned was in my bedroom, and I had in fact walked past her just moments beforehand, so it wasn't her. It also didn't look solid either, like a weird line drawing made a smudged chalk, but it looked exactly like a small dog. I was instant nope, and turned right around and walked out. I went back to my room and picked up my little white dog for protection, who was still snoozing on the floor, and then went to my sister's room and got her to come with me back into the lounge room. So there we both were, halfway in the lounge room with the faint, wispy outline of this small white dog staring straight at us without moving a single muscle. After a few seconds, she gets the courage to creep a bit more forward and reach the light switch and flicks it on. It was an effing plastic shopping bag. Had a recurring dream I was in a car accident and died. It happened so often I typed the exact events out on my computer so that if I did die that way, someone would have proof I saw it coming. What kind of tree I hit, what bones I had broken, how I died, and how I felt myself die. I refused to drive the road it happened on. Didn't have an exact location, but just knew it was close to home for a few months and always thought it was how I was going to die. A year later, my cousin died in this exact way. Same kind of tree, same bones broken, small town, everyone knows everything that happens, was close to his house. He and I were raised like brother and sister, and when I heard the news, it freaked me out to no end. The part that gets me the most is in my dream, I heard them tell my mother I died instantly, but I knew it wasn't true. I had felt myself die, so when they told us he died instantly, I lost it. I was on a stretch of highway in Iowa, totally flat land, cornfields in every direction. There was only one other car on the highway. There was a black Cadillac sedan in front of me. I decided to pass it. As I passed it and checked my blind spot to merge back into the right lane, it was completely gone, just disappeared. I was the only car to be seen anywhere. I knew I had been driving behind it for quite a while. I had noticed it because you don't often see a black Cadillac sedan in the cornfields of Iowa. It was there as clear as day, and then it just wasn't. There were no exits, it didn't pull over to the side, it just vanished. I only wish I had looked over at the driver as I passed. It's one of those weird little experiences we have that I'll never find out the answer to. A few years ago, my phone rang at around 4 a.m. This was weird as it is, as a 4 a.m. call usually means something bad. I hazily grabbed my phone and looked to see who it was. No number. I answered, "Hello?" The voice on the other end was a girl, but her inflection was the saddest I've ever heard. It sounded like she was about 2 seconds away from killing herself. She says, "Are you sleeping yet?" This freaks me out, but I'm not sure I'm hearing correctly, and I say, "Sorry, what?" She asks again, "Are you sleeping yet?" This time with more intensity. Her voice is the eeriest part. It sounds more panicked, and now I'm pretty freaked out. I say, "Who is this?" "Anna?" "Who?" "Anna." I don't know anyone called Anna, so I threw the phone down and was like, "Nope." This is more a strange thing that happened to my mom, but I was there. I was a baby, and my mom was single, living in an apartment in downtown Atlanta. She had Cheerios for me on the kitchen table. I knocked over the box, so there were Cheerios everywhere, but she was late for work, so she left them, took me to daycare, and she went to work. When she came home that night, the Cheerios were on the kitchen table in the shape of a giant smiley face. Nothing was missing. The doors and windows were locked. My mom called the police, but there was nothing they could do. There had been a few reported rapes in the sketchy areas near us, targeting single mothers. To this day, we still don't know what happened. When I was a kid, I was playing hide-and-go-seek in the woods behind my house with some friends. I had a great hiding spot behind some thick bushes. I saw a man walking down the trail toward me. As he got closer, I remember him having no face at all, no facial features, just the skin. I froze and started crying. The man kept walking by me. I ran home and never told anyone about it because I thought I was crazy. I finally told my mom about it, but when I was in high school, she told me about a man that lived in our neighborhood who had a failed suicide attempt and seriously disfigured his face. He never walked the main streets, taking the back trails of the woods to go to his job and a bar where he drank all night. It's possible I saw him and was so mortified that I actually blocked out his face. Creeps me out to this day because I remember it vividly. For a while, I thought my house was haunted. I used to sleep with a small bookshelf that was mounted on the wall a couple of feet above my head. It was small and held 20 or so books. For about a week, every night a book would fall out of the shelf and hit me on the head as I slept, waking me up. I thought maybe I bumped the wall while sleeping and jostled it out of place. So I put a rail on the shelf so that the books could only be removed by lifting them up and then pulling them out. The next night, a book fell on my head again. Freaked out, I had the bookshelf moved to the opposite wall, basically at the foot of my bed. The next night, a book fell on my head again. I had no idea what to make of it, so I took the shelf down and slept downstairs the rest of that night. I still have no idea why that was happening, but it was kind of freaky. This didn't happen to me personally, but to my grade 6 teacher and her husband. It seems pretty appropriate, so I thought I'd share. I guess a little while after starting a family, they decided to buy a cabin up in northern Ontario, like a little summer getaway sort of deal. They looked around for a bit, trying to find something that would fit their specifications, mostly a place nice and out of the way, not super crowded, and around a single lake like you see with a lot of cabin properties in Ontario. Anyhow, they eventually found a place that was perfect, about a half-hour drive or so from the nearest town, on its own little lake and everything. Perfect little spot, and affordable too. See, I guess things first started to get a little strange with the circumstances of how the place came up for sale. It was a property that had been taken back by the bank because its original owner just sort of disappeared. One day he's making payments, the next the place is abandoned, and he can't be reached anywhere, just gone. And it's not like this was some sort of little shack. I mean, it was a smaller place, but the guy had sunk some serious cash into it with renovations and the like. So they buy the place, move some of their stuff up for the summer and settle in with the kids. Everything's great, everyone's having a good time, but I guess one day my teacher is sitting in the living room portion of the property and she realizes something. She grabs the layout plans of the cabin, which they received after purchasing the place, and starts to really look them over. Soon enough, it dawns on her that something's not quite right. See, there's another room marked out on the layout that isn't in the cabin, or so it looks. She walks over to where the door should be, and it's a wall, but then she realizes that with the angles and lengths and whatnot, there actually might be another little room behind it. So she shows it to her husband, and he's pretty intrigued and says, "Hey, why don't we bust open the wall and see what's behind it?" Good idea. They had been thinking about redoing the room a bit anyways, so they went right ahead. The boards come down, and true enough, there's a bricked up doorway. Her husband takes a good swing at the bricks with a sledgehammer, and it goes right through. There was another tiny room. Now this is where things really take a turn for the eerie. The room is about the size of a large closet. Square, plain, walls, wood floor, nothing too crazy. It's what's inside of it, though that was strange. A single wooden chair, facing away from the door with the light bulb hanging down from the ceiling directly over it. And on the wall the chair was facing was a small, painted self-portrait of a man in a dirty wooden frame. The picture was clearly done by an amateur, but it was kind of distorted. The colors were dark, and the guy in it was just staring forward with these dead gray eyes, and his mouth a little open. It was unnerving to say the least. They got rid of the contents of the room and actually just ended up boarding it up again. I guess they couldn't find a use for such a small space, or maybe they just still found it too creepy. I don't know. What I do know, however, is that if I were in that situation, I would have burned that effing cabin down and never looked back. TLDR, a creepy effing cabin. I would have loved to seen this in the visual context, to see pictures of the room and imagine it. You do a good job describing it, but still a lot of questions. Fascinating. I used to work in a nursing home on the night shift. Often the patients would hallucinate. One night an old lady said to me, "There's a man wearing a blue coat, holding a gun, looking through the window." I asked her where, and she pointed to the mirror. I didn't think much of it and went on to the next patient. A few hours later, in another part of the nursing home, a patient said to me, "There's a man in a blue coat holding a gun to your head." Well, I thought that was pretty creepy, but old people hallucinate, so I went on with my night. Later that night, my supervisor grabbed my arm and hissed into my ear, "Call the police, there's an intruder." I asked her what she was talking about, and she pointed down the hall and said there was a man in a blue coat outside one of the patient's rooms looking in. There was no one there. I got her to calm down and convinced her that she must be tired getting to the end of their shift. I didn't tell her about the patient's hallucinations. After 7 years of working in nursing homes and hospitals, that's one of the creepiest things that I ever experienced. This one's a longer one, and the weirdest shit that's ever happened to me. One night after work, I went on a drive. At the time, I was working 7 days a week, 8 to 12 hours a day. It was rough. Normally, I went home and slept what little time I had with my SO and my computer, but that night I decided to go for a drive. No reason. Just felt like the thing to do that night. I even went pretty far out of my way to complete the other side of the smallish town, about 15 minutes. As I'm driving on this highway or strip, I feel like a box is closing in on me. Nothing bad, more of a protective shield type thing. It was encasing me, guiding me. To what, I had no clue. Then it started to feel lonely in the box, like I was missing part of it. I don't know how to describe it, but a few moments later, I feel like I was starting to link with another box. My missing box I've been searching for, all of 10 minutes LOL. But man, did it feel good to find this other box. But where was it? I'm driving and it starts to slip. I slow down and drive for a little bit, going about 10 under the speed limit. Then I feel it. It's close, really close, and I need to speed up. Then there it is, my missing box, right directly behind me in this car. I don't see it, just link up with it. Now, I had no clue who was in the car behind me, but I knew where they were going. Somehow I was just following them, but I was leading? I wasn't looking at him for clues. I was always well in front and just knew the way. We traveled for about 15 minutes off the highway on some roads I had been on maybe a handful of times in my life, but I knew exactly where this car was going, where my other box was leading me. I didn't know what was going to happen when I got there. I just knew I had to meet my box. Finally, I pull up in this driveway I've never been in and wait a few moments. Here it is. And he pulls in. What the F must he be thinking, I wondered. A girl gets out and walks inside crying and gives me a weird look but rushes past. I get out now and know I need to talk to my box mate. He starts to back out, but I beckon him to stop. Come here. He does, and I just get in his car. Never seen this dude before, never seen me before. I get in and know his name, just his first name though. It's Jeff. Weird, right? Yeah, it's effing weird. I knew he'd just gotten broken up with. Pretty easy to figure out with context clues, but I knew without having to use those. They were just there. I came in and talked to him, asked how he was, what he planned to do. I got weird looks for a few moments, then he just broke down, told me everything. How she was his life, and he planned on ending it all. I've never been much of a person to be able to comfort others in their time of need, but I wasn't that guy tonight. Somehow I managed to say all the right things to this guy. My other box. I just knew. I knew everything he needed to hear. After about 30 minutes of talking, I told him everything was going to be all right. He asked who I was, and I was about to tell him. Then I just got these big red prohibition symbols in my head. I kinda shook my head to wiggle them out, and they went away. I didn't tell him who I was, just told him I couldn't tell him that, but to know he was in good hands. I shook his hand and got in my car, left, and went home. That is the single strangest thing to ever happen to me. I still don't know what the F it was about it to this day. Still don't get why it happened. Glad it did. I've never read a story quite like this. Crazy that it may sound to most of us. I mean, sure, maybe you were taken over by a guardian angel or a spirit or something, but if that's how it happened, that's pretty miraculous. Cool. Story from my parents that involves me, but I was too young to know. Between the ages of 4 and 6, I would always talk to myself when I was in the kitchen. My parents would ask me who I was talking to, and I would say a little boy. This went on for a number of years. One day, my parents were driving back from an evening at friends, and it was dark. Just as they went to pull into the driveway, my mother slammed on the brakes. She had seen a little boy run out the front door of our house and into the road in front of the car. Not only this, but it had instantly flashed daylight at the same time, like an old movie flashing in front of her face. On to top of that, my dad turned to her and said, "Did you see that?" and recounted that he had seen exactly the same thing. For the record, neither of them had been smoking anything. After that, I never spoke to the little boy again. A few weeks ago, I'm now 22, neighbor from across the road came over to borrow some sugar. My mom invited her in for a cup of tea. This is Britain after all, and they got chatting. Turns out, she'd lived on that road for 45 years. They began talking about how new street measures that were coming in on our road, my mom pointing out they were good, even though it was 20 years she'd lived in the road that hadn't been an accident. The neighbor then went on to say, a few years before we moved in, that a little boy of about 6 who lived in our house heard the ice cream man coming and ran out of our house, through the gate and straight out onto the street to get an ice cream, only to be hit by an oncoming car in the opposite direction, just where, 16 years ago, both my parents had seen the same thing played out in that quick flash of broad daylight late at night. Creepiest shit ever. Synchronized visions on behalf of both of my parents, both recounting something that had happened on that street, and I never talked to my imaginary friend since. Goosebumps whenever I'm back in this house now. TLDR. Had an imaginary friend who disappeared after both my parents simultaneously saw the ghost of a little boy run in front of their car late one night. Also, that flashed daylight. Never spoke to the imaginary friend ever again. Found out years later, a kid who lived in the house got run over. This happened a few years ago when I was living with a roommate in a mobile home. I was home by myself, sitting in the recliner listening to music very softly with the lights out and the blinds opened. It was a bright full moon that gave the place a very soft amount of light, enough to navigate about easily without turning any lights on. As I sat there, at once I heard what sounded like my roommate's bedroom door open, and I could feel the pressure change in the room immediately, followed by the floor sounding as if someone was walking across it. Not the sound of footsteps, but the sound of the floor moving. The steps continued right up to me, stopping where we felt like someone standing over my right shoulder. That sense of presence, I instantly got a full-body chill and goosebumps, and was too frightened to turn and look. I quietly and calmly said aloud, "What's up? Do you need something?" After a few seconds of calling out, the feeling of someone standing there went away. I got up, turned on the lights, double-checked the doors and windows, making sure they were shut and locked properly, and also checked my roommate's bedroom door. It was shut tight. No one in there. Windows shut and locked. Didn't get much sleep that night, but I do remember falling asleep with all the lights on. Haven't experienced anything like that since. My last 2 years of college were spent living in a 2-story off-campus apartment with 5 other friends, 6-bedroom apartment. Throughout the 2 years, everybody had experiences with this being weird. Everybody would get the feeling of being watched and or not being alone. After a while, things escalated, and you would feel things you were in shake. Like, if you were in a chair, your chair would shake. If you were lying in bed, the bed would start to shake. I don't mean minor shakes either. We all attribute it to the house just being old and it shaking with normal vibrations of the place settling. A large truck driving by, strong winds, etc. After a while though, we started paying attention and had to rule all of those things out. So, we started placing cups of water next to our seats, beds, etc. We would notice that while whatever object was shaking, nothing else in the room was. I would be lying in bed, and my bed would shake violently, yet the glass of water on my nightstand right next to the bed showed no signs of movement whatsoever. One night the shaking was particularly strong, so I shouted, "Knock it off." The shaking stopped almost instantly. A few weeks later it happened again, so I shouted, "Go bug Angela." About 10 minutes later, Angela came darting into my room saying her bed just started shaking for no reason. Could never figure out what the cause was, but it was all just very creepy. I was asleep in a hotel room in the countryside of Ireland when I woke from a nightmare to hear the sound of horrible growling and heavy breathing in my right ear. Swear it sounded no more than 2 inches away from my ear. I thought a maniac had gotten in and was about to rape and kill me. I was frozen in terror until I couldn't bear it anymore and commando rolled off the side of my bed, slapping on the light and burst into tears. The split second the light went on, the growling stopped and there was nothing there. TL, DR. I was attacked by a demon in a historic location in Ireland. Edit 1, spacebar edit 2. I could have moved my body, but I was too scared. My muscles tensed up and I just decided to lie very still. There was a lot of adrenaline. I lay there staring at the only visible thing in the room, the little red light or the smoke detector for a very long time, just listening to the growling. It wasn't like sleep paralysis. As for exploding head syndrome, I don't know. The hotel was a centuries-old building that had been renovated. It had at one time been a convent. For a while, there used to be something that ran around our bed at night, would tug on the side like it was trying to climb up but couldn't. We have a very high bed. Didn't care much and dismissed it as half a dream until my wife mentioned it jokingly as a reoccurring dream she was having. After I said I saw the same thing, she refused to talk about it anymore. Eventually, it stopped showing up a few years ago. Don't really know what it was, but makes for an interesting story, nonetheless. I've got one that has stuck with me for years. When I was a high school freshman, I was frequently hospitalized for a health problem I've had all my life. Things were especially bad around then because I was going through puberty, thus causing my body to grow faster, which escalated my problems. I developed a cyst in my hip right next to a nerve bundle. Doctors suggested that I undergo scoliotherapy to get rid of the cyst and end the pain. The only problem was that if anything went wrong during this procedure, my leg could have been crippled. So we thought about it and decided to take the chance and get the procedure done. But when the day came around, strange things started happening. That morning, a secretary called my mom and said that we would have to reschedule because the surgeon was too sick to come in. It was the first time in the history of his job that he was ever that sick, so we rescheduled, and when weeks later that day came around, it happened again. At this point, my family and I got the feeling that it wasn't supposed to have the surgery done. I never did, and things got better on their own. It's very eerie to think about, almost like it's more than a super coincidence. I always wondered how different my life would be if I'd gotten that surgery. In my bedroom, when I still lived with my parents, there were separated acrimoniously under the same roof, and my bedroom wall was also a wall from my dad's bedroom. One night, I woke up with a start at about 2 a.m. It was really windy outside. I could hear it howling as it did down the street. With the wind came the strongest sense of foreboding. I felt like something bad was rushing toward our house. I clung to my blankets and held my breath. Then, in the corner of my room, where I shared a wall with my dad, I saw this face appear. It was like a hologram. I could see the cabinet right through it. It was this giant, evil-looking demonic face, sort of upside-down triangle-shaped. It narrowed its eyes at me, then dropped its jaw impossibly low in a snarl at me. I freaked right the F out, just staring at it. Then I scrunched my eyes closed and started breathing deeply, imagining white light around myself and thinking, just ignore it, just ignore it. After what felt like forever, it was like a weight lifted out of the room, and I peeked out from my blanket, and it was gone. The next day I told my mom that something freaky happened in my room, and I didn't want to sleep in there again. So she was like, okay, you can take where I've been sleeping in the study, and I'll sleep in your bed. So that's what we did. The next morning, she walked with me to school, and after a few minutes of silence, she said, "You know, I saw the strangest thing in your room last night," and proceeded to describe exactly the same face that I saw. She slept in another downstairs room after that, and after Dad finally left, she took the main bedroom upstairs, but I kept the room downstairs. We never used my old room as a bedroom again, and Mom sold the house literally last week. This was only in 2007 as well. I was 18. TL, DR. My mom and I had separate, identical experiences in my old bedroom.